Occupational Therapy 236, OT for Youth. This is our Week 1 Introductory lecture. My name is Melisa Kaye, and I'll be your instructor. Let's get started. First of all, welcome to class and welcome to learning about individuals who are between the ages of 13 and 25 years of age, which will be our focus for the rest of the semester. We have a number of objectives today. We're going to look at a broad overview of the course and the content. We'll also identify the variety of practice settings in which we work with youth. We'll review some theories and models, and we'll continue that throughout the semester. We will identify key occupations for youth. And finally, we're going to dig into the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, to see how it's organized. All right, so our course focus. Occupational performance of teens and young adults. Sometimes you'll hear them called teenagers, teens, young adults, youth, transitional aged youth. All means the same thing, those individuals who are between 13 and 25. We're also going to explore some diagnoses this semester. We'll explore a number of diagnoses, but in particular, we're going to look at autism spectrum disorder, intellectual disability, traumatic brain injury, schizophrenia, and other selected conditions. So throughout your time in the program, you're going to be learning about different diagnoses in different classes, and we kind of align it with the age and stage of development to some extent. Our third course focus is applied and practical skill building. So in this course, we're going to be doing a competency in sensory testing. A competency is a pass or fail, actually a pass or a redo until you pass, test of your ability to execute particular OT-related skills on another individual, and we'll work on that and figure out how that needs to happen. But this one is sensory testing. So how well are the senses working? Also, the cranial nerves that innervate those particular senses. Another practical skill that we're going to look at is wheelchair measurement. That'll be later on in the semester. We'll also look at neurological treatment and mental health treatment and explore a number of different ways of intervening with youth who have either neurological or mental health conditions. All right, so part 1, practice settings. There's a lot of different places and environments and contexts that we see youth within. The first one, of course, is school settings. So for our purposes, youth in school goes up to the age of 22. That's what the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act considers a school-age person, not up to 18, but up till their 22nd birthday. In the school setting, if we were looking at kids, we would focus on what we're doing with kids in that setting and how we're getting them to progress. We do that, but with youth, we're also looking at transition to the community because our clients are moving from childhood to adulthood. We'll look at individualized transition plan. That is the legal document that describes how a transition is going to happen from school to community. We'll also be looking at the individualized education plan, which is another legal document that follows a child from the time they enter school-based services and enter school till the time that they leave school. That document spells out exactly what's going to need to happen legally in terms of their services, their placement, where they're going to school, etc. And then we'll also be talking about how in the school setting, there's a great opportunity for OT advocacy. And what I mean by that is that it's very easy in the school setting to kind of reduce this idea of OT-based services to fine motor, and in particular, handwriting. Maybe some intentional issues, maybe a little bit of moving around the school and organizational issues. But for many schools, if they don't know a lot about OT, they'll kind of reduce OT services to those very narrow parameters. What we want to do is we want to broaden the scope of knowledge about what we do with youth in the schools. So we'll be talking more about that. All right, our second practice setting would be the community. ILS stands for Independent Living Skills, and we'll be looking at those in terms of skills in home, financial skills and abilities, health maintenance, and also safety in the community and personal safety. We'll also be looking at employment, and there's a number of different kinds of employment available to youth. There's competitive employment, so go out, get a job, make money. There's supportive employment, which is facilitated by any number of professionals to help that youth to get and maintain and sustain employment. And then there is also volunteer work. And then finally, we'll look at work skills of a variety of different types. Teens and young adults often need to refine their work skills, both the hard skills and the soft skills, such as time management, stress management, and decision-making skills. So some of our executive functioning and also skills that are just needed for everyday life. Okay. Our third practice setting continues with community settings, or what we consider community settings. And one area is about housing. So different options for housing when one moves out of living with a caregiver, and also the ability to search for available options. We'll be looking at that. We'll be looking at also a social participation, which for youth is huge. They are moving from being most connected to caregivers to being most connected to their peers. So we'll look at that in terms of leisure activities, safety, friendships, and also sexual relationships. And we're going to look at transportation. So using public transportation, safety awareness on transportation, other kinds of transportation that may be available, and also driving. Our fourth practice setting kind of slide and information, piece of information is the hospital setting. So we may see youth in acute care, in rehabilitative settings, both inpatient and outpatient, and in day treatment centers. All right. So now we're going to jump into theoretical information, and we're going to start with the model of human occupation. You've been exposed to this before, but we're going to revisit, and now we're going to start layering. So you heard about it as a theory. Now we're going to layer it in terms of looking at our work with youth. We have a lot of different theories and models of practice that we use with individuals at all ages and stages of development. And we're going to focus on some theories that explain or describe how youth functions and how their relationships function based on what we know about youth. And we're also going to be looking at some models of practice that more particularly focus in on occupational performance across diagnoses, and also guide the therapist's thinking and assist us in intervention planning. So the theory is kind of a big, broad look at a phenomenon and the relationships within it. And the models of practice dig a little bit deeper into OT specific kinds of tools, thinking, and practice. All right, so our first look is going to be at the model of human occupation. As I said, we commonly refer to it as MOHO. It was introduced in the United States, and it's a very Western kind of approach to thinking about how occupation is motivated, patterned, and performed. And Gary Kielhofner from University of Chicago is the person who is most frequently linked to MOHO and did quite a lot of work developing it and popularizing it. All right, so MOHO is kind of a complex model. It has a number of different tenets or aspects of the model. The first is that it is a dynamic and open system of human actions. Well, what does that mean? When we think about dynamic, we think about moving or changing, right, over time. And when we think about an open system, we think about other factors being able to come in and affect how humans act. So this is a very dynamic and kind of interactive type of model, and it's based on these three interconnected subsystems. And if this is review for you and you're already super well versed in it, that's awesome. Think about, if you would, how you might apply some of this knowledge to working with individuals who are 13 to 25 and how that might operationalize in work with youth. All right, so these three interconnected subsystems, we have volition, habituation, and performance capacity. We also want to look at interaction with the environment and how feedback from the environment and from these subsystems becomes new input as a person moves through their life. So I put together this diagram to kind of, I think in pictures, and I wanted to look at, okay, how does it look if it's all on one page, right? So we'll go through each of these, but if this is helpful for you, that's great. So in the center circle, you see volition, habituation, environment, and performance capacity. And those are the four aspects of MOHO. And then around the sides in the rectangles, you see terms or kind of explanatory notes that are associated with each of these areas. For example, volition is associated with personal causation, interests, values, and goals. And that makes sense because volition meaning like what are we motivated to do, right? What are we pressed to do really has to do with what we're interested in, what we value, what our goals are, and how we in our personal lives reach out to engage with the environment and enable new things to happen. I hope that makes sense. We're going to go through each of the subsystems separately now, but you can return to this slide if you'd like to look at kind of the whole picture altogether. Very briefly, habituation involves roles, routines, and habits, which we know from the OTPF, right? And performance capacity is our actual skills, so motor, process, communication, and interaction. And then finally, we know from PEO and PEOP that the environment always plays a role in influencing how people act, right? So again, from the OTPF, we have physical, social, temporal, cultural, and spiritual, and virtual environments that we're looking at. All right, so let's break this down. The first subsystem is the volition system. And again, just as I described on the visual, volition involves a person's need for action. It's the motivation for engagement. And we know if we're not motivated, then we tend not to act, right? And think about it. With a youth, motivation is everything. What do I want to do? Because I'm in the phase of my life where I am standing on my own 2 feet. I'm separating from my parents. I'm becoming more independent. I may be thinking about higher education, work, vocation, moving out, driving, all of these things that really involve a lot of independence. So volition is huge for youth. And again, those 3 aspects, personal causation, values, and interests, really affect it. The next system is habituation, and that is the process by which occupation is organized into patterns or routines. So when we do something new, we need to spend a lot of energy and a lot of focus really drilling into it, right? But we know if we had to do that with everything, it would be so exhausting. So what do? We form habits, roles, and routines, right? So that our life becomes organized into some series of schemas, and some things can happen more automatically. And this is part of MOHO because the things that we fall into and are familiar and easy and pattern for us really influence how we act. So think about it with kids, right? They're learning patterns. With youth, they're cementing patterns, and they're also moving into new patterns. And then with adults, they're really solidifying a lot of patterns. And when we get to older adults, their patterns may need to change, but they kind of don't want them to change, right? Because it's a period of loss of independence. And so habits, routines, and roles again need to change. So this is important for our youth in terms of responding to what's happening in their lives, and also internalizing what they do in public, what they do in private, and how they act, and how that happens for each individual. All right. Whoops. Okay, the third subsystem is performance capacity. And this is the abilities, physical and mental, that underlie our occupational performance. So the building blocks or foundation. There are objective and subjective components. And what that means is that some are really cut and dried and concrete, and other abilities are more fluctuating. They're more soft skills. They're more based on perhaps emotion, perhaps environment, and so they shift a bit. In any case, we have motor skills, as you know, process skills, and then communication and interaction skills. So taken right from the OTPF. All right, and then we have the environment, and we know to understand occupation, we have to understand the environments in which it takes place. So once again, they include physical, what's around me, I'm in my office, the social environment, which is who am I with, the temporal environment, which is about time. It could be, am I on time, or it could be, how much time does this take, this occupation? So time works in many different ways. If you think about youth and work, I have to get to work on time. I have to stay for a certain period of time. Each task takes a certain period of time, and I need to get a certain amount done. So time becomes very important when we're thinking about youth. Then, of course, cultural environment, which we'll go into much more, but looking at how does one's background, race, ethnicity affect how they are in the world. So that kind of culture, but also the culture of school and the culture of work and the culture of various community settings. So in other words, what are the what are the customs or the accepted ways of behaving within a certain setting. So we'll think about culture in both of those ways. And then, of course, a spiritual environment. So what does one bring in terms of beliefs and morals and ethics? And then finally, and we've been discovering how very important this is, our virtual environment and how does that work? And not only that, but who does it work for? How can we improve it for folks who don't do well in a virtual environment? And how can we make the best use of virtual environments when we're engaged with them?